A young doctor was leaving after an exhausting day at the hospital when he came across a severely injured man on the street, on the brink of the worst. He decided to save the man's life, but was fired by his boss for bringing a poor man to the hospital. But when they discovered the man's identity, Oliver was a young surgeon, known for his dedication and exceptional skills. At the famous hospital where he worked, he stood out not only for his talent, but also for his admirable work ethic. Days and nights blurred together in a crazy routine of surgeries and consultations, where Oliver put all his effort and energy. For him, every heartbeat he helped restore, every breath he helped regulate was proof that his life's mission was being fulfilled. His mother, a traditional woman and his #1 fan, watched his life with a mix of pride and concern. She dreamed of the day when Oliver would set aside his exclusive dedication to the hospital to marry and start a family. Every time she visited her son, their conversations inevitably returned to the same point. Oliver, you need to think about your future. A wife, children. You can't spend your entire life in the hospital. For Oliver, however, his passion for medicine and commitment to his patients were non-negotiable. He saw each day as a new opportunity to save lives and make a difference. Marriage and the family life his mother so desired for him seemed distant and irrelevant compared to the noble mission of helping people. When he entered the operating room, the outside world disappeared. There, surrounded by his team and medical equipment, he was able to practice what he believed to be his true calling. The pressure and expectations from his mother, however, did not go unnoticed. In some moments of solitude, Oliver wondered if he would ever find a balance between his career and a more complete personal life. During the rare moments of pause, when he allowed himself a brief coffee or a solitary walk through the hospital's silent corridors at night, he reflected on the future his mother imagined for him. After an exhausting day at work, Oliver always left the hospital on foot, liking to park his car far enough to take a walk and breathe fresh air. One day, something unexpected caught his attention. In the park near the hospital, a homeless man was lying on the ground, severely injured and in a deplorable state. The man's face was marked by pain and suffering, barely able to move a finger. His torn and dirty clothes were in stark contrast to Oliver's immaculate white coat, and people passed by the man without caring, as if he were trash. But Oliver didn't think twice. His compassionate heart and vocation for medicine spoke louder. He approached the man carefully, kneeling beside him. The scene was heart-wrenching, deep cuts, bruises all over his body, and an expression of despair. With a firm but gentle voice, Oliver tried to calm the man, assuring him that he was there to help. Ignoring the man's pitiable state and the potential consequences, Oliver quickly took out his phone and called an ambulance. Oliver was strong. He knew that this life was as valuable as any other and deserved to be saved. With determination and surprising calm, Oliver coordinated the care right there in the park, preparing the man to be taken to the hospital. Every gesture demonstrated his empathy and unwavering commitment to medicine, even when circumstances were difficult and completely out of the ordinary. With the injured homeless man by his side, Oliver knew he had to act quickly. When the paramedics arrived, their expressions of disgust were evident. The man's deplorable state, dirty and ragged, made them reluctant to touch him. "He needs help," Oliver said, determination shining in his eyes. "Now." The paramedics exchanged looks as they placed the man in the ambulance. It was uncommon for someone like that man to receive such attention. Arriving at the hospital, which was very close to the park, the receptionist, seeing the scene, frowned, her distrust clear. She shook her head in disapproval, muttering about rules and hygiene standards. But Oliver was undeterred. He knew his duty was to the human being in front of him, not to appearances or prejudices. "He has the same right to treatment as anyone else," he affirmed, his voice firm but full of compassion. "I take responsibility." The receptionist, still displeased, reluctantly took down the details, but Oliver didn't care. He knew he was doing the right thing. That man had a chance, and he would do everything in his power to ensure that this chance was not wasted. As the stretcher was pushed through the corridors, nurses and doctors cast incredulous glances, and whispered comments filled the air. The presence of that man, dirty and ragged, seemed a shocking contrast in the sterilized hospital environment. The attending physician, Dr. Harris, approached with a look of evident displeasure. He glanced quickly at the patient and then turned to Oliver, his tone laden with reproach. "What's going on here, Oliver? We can't just bring anyone in here. This man, he doesn't belong in this place." Oliver, remaining calm, explained the severity of the man's injuries and the urgent need for surgery. But Dr. Harris shook his head, firm in his refusal. "We can't risk the safety of other patients. Besides, who will pay for this? We don't have resources to waste." Indignation rose within Oliver, but despite being tired from hours of work and having to return to the hospital, he maintained his composure. "He is a human being and is severely injured. We can't let him die for lack of care. I'll perform the surgery myself." Dr. Harris crossed his arms, clearly unhappy, but before he could protest further, Oliver was already preparing for the operation. He knew the road would be difficult and that he would face many obstacles, but his determination to save that life was unbreakable. As the team prepared the operating room, the tension was evident on everyone's faces. Many were still shocked by his decision, but some, inspired by his courage, began to offer their support. Oliver was ready to fight, not only against the man's injuries, but against the prejudice and indifference that threatened his life. He focused entirely on the task at hand, each movement calculated with precision. The nurses, though hesitant, followed his instructions, recognizing the gravity of the situation and Oliver's undeniable skill. As the surgery progressed, the room began to transform. The initial silence, laden with doubt, was replaced by an almost magical synchronicity. Everyone in the room was united by a common goal: to save the life of the man on the operating table. Oliver worked with impressive precision, guided by his experience and compassion. Finally, after hours of intense effort, Oliver made the last stitch in the incision. He looked at the team, exhausted but relieved. "He will survive," he said, his voice firm but laden with emotion. With a collective sigh of relief spread through the room. The nurses, who had previously judged him, now looked at Oliver with newfound admiration. The anesthetist gave a slight approving smile. Oliver knew that this was just the beginning of a long recovery for the patient, but the first battle had been won. And in that moment, he had proven that compassion and courage could overcome prejudice and indifference. The next day, the hospital was abuzz with gossip about the previous night's events. Oliver, still exhausted but satisfied with the surgery's success, was reviewing the patient's chart when he was summoned to the chief doctor's office, Mr. George. The formal nature of the call already hinted at trouble. Upon entering the office, Oliver found Mr. George seated behind his desk, his expression serious and angry. "Oliver, we need to talk about what happened last night," began Mr. George, his voice filled with disapproval. Oliver remained standing, looking directly into his superior's eyes. "I did what needed to be done to save a life," he responded calmly. Mr. George shook his head impatiently. "You violated hospital rules by bringing that homeless man here. You created unsanitary conditions and put other patients at risk. This is unacceptable." Oliver felt indignation rise within him but remained calm. "He was dying, Mr. George. There was no time for bureaucracy. Every life matters." Mr. George sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That may be noble, but rules exist for a reason, and violating them cannot be ignored. I'm in a difficult position here, Oliver. I must ensure the hospital operates within safety and hygiene standards." Oliver knew he was dealing with a rigid system, but his conscience would not allow him to act otherwise. "I take full responsibility for what I did, but I don't regret it." Mr. George paused before uttering the words that would change the course of Oliver's career. "You are dismissed, Oliver. Please hand over your badge and leave the hospital." Oliver felt a knot form in his stomach. The sense of injustice was overwhelming, but he knew there was nothing more to be said. With one last defiant look at Mr. George, he handed over his badge and left the office. As he walked through the hospital corridors, the curious glances and whispers of colleagues followed him. Oliver kept his head held high, determination still burning in his heart. He had lost his job, but not his conviction. He knew this battle was just part of a larger fight for compassion and justice. With a heavy heart, Oliver went to his mother's house. He knew he needed to tell her what had happened, even though he feared her reaction. As he entered the house, the familiar smell of home-cooked food and the welcoming warmth enveloped him, bringing brief comfort. Sitting in the living room, Oliver's mother immediately sensed something was wrong. "Oliver, what happened?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Oliver took a deep breath, sitting beside her. "I was fired today, Mum," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I brought a homeless man to the hospital, and the chief doctor said I violated the rules." She listened in silence to everything he said, her eyes expressing a mix of pain and pride. When he finished, she placed her hand over his, squeezing it tightly. "You did the right thing, my son. You followed your heart and saved a life. That's what matters." Oliver looked at her, surprised by the lack of reproach. "But I lost my job, Mum. I don't know what I'm going to do now." She smiled gently, running her hand through his hair. "You will find a way. Doctors like you, with that passion and compassion, are rare. Some hospital will recognize that. Until then, you have me. We'll get through this together." Her words brought a new wave of hope to Oliver. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but his mother's unwavering support gave him strength. "Thank you, Mum. I really needed to hear that." She just smiled, pulling him into a comforting hug. "You will always have my support, Oliver. Now let's find a new beginning for you. Something tells me this is just a curve in the road." Feeling lighter, Oliver knew that with his mother's courage and support, he could face any challenge the future held. While facing his new reality, the hospital continued to operate. Mr. George, the chief doctor, was on edge. He had received news of an imminent inspection from the health ministry, an evaluation that could determine the hospital's future. The last thing he wanted was a scandal involving a homeless man. With a stern and worried expression, Mr. George called the head nurse to his office. "We need to remove that homeless man from the hospital immediately," he ordered, his voice firm and unyielding. "We can't risk the inspectors seeing him here. It would compromise our reputation and could bring severe consequences." The head nurse, although reluctant, knew that Mr. George's orders were not to be disobeyed. She left the office with a knot in her stomach, preparing to deliver the difficult news to the medical team caring for the patient. As the team gathered around the man, now conscious and recovering, the head nurse explained Mr. George's decision. "But he's not in any condition to be transferred," protested one of the nurses. "This could put his life at risk again." The head nurse, feeling the weight of the order, tried to calm the team. "I know, we all know, but these are the orders. We need to find a safe way to remove him from here before the inspection begins." As the team discussed the best options, the news quickly spread through the hospital corridors. Many were outraged, remembering the sacrifice Oliver had made to save that man. Mr. George's decision seemed cruel and unjust, but the imminent inspection instilled fear in everyone, forcing compliance. The situation grew increasingly tense, and the hospital, once a place of healing, was now divided between the duty to save lives and the rigid administrative impositions. The hospital was in a state of high alert. The team tried with all their might to maintain an appearance of normality. Mr. George was tense, walking through the corridors and ensuring everything was in order. When Inspector Grace arrived, accompanied by her team, the atmosphere became even more charged with anxiety. Grace, a woman with a sharp gaze and firm posture, began the inspection with meticulous attention to every detail. As she moved through the hospital, the staff followed her orders precisely, aware that any mistake could be decisive. Meanwhile, in the ward where the homeless man was admitted, the medical team had not been able to remove him in time, so they hoped the inspection wouldn't reach that area. But inevitably, Grace's team arrived at that ward. When she entered the room and her eyes landed on the man in the bed, something unexpected happened. Grace's expression changed drastically, from professional and cold to absolute shock, her eyes wide with what she saw. "Father." Her voice trembled as she spoke the word. The man in the bed, still weak, opened his eyes and looked at her, confusion clear on his face. "Grace?" he murmured softly, recognizing his daughter. The room fell into total silence, everyone stunned by what they had just witnessed. Grace, recovering from the initial shock, turned abruptly to Mr. George, who was accompanying her. "This man is my father, Jonathan. He has been missing for months. I demand that he receives the best treatment immediately." Mr. George, caught off guard, tried to stammer a response. "But Inspector, the rules—" Grace interrupted, her voice now firm and authoritative. "I don't care about the rules right now. He is a patient like any other and must be treated with dignity and the best care possible. If it is discovered that you intended to remove him, there will be serious consequences." The determination and authority in her voice left no room for argument. Mr. George, feeling cornered, realized he had no choice but to comply. The revelation had completely changed the course of the inspection, and with it, the fate of the hospital and everyone involved in that story. After the shocking revelation that the homeless man was her missing father, Grace delved into the situation with renewed determination. She began investigating everything that had happened since Jonathan had been admitted to the hospital. This led her to discover the story of Oliver, the young surgeon who had risked his career to save her father. When Grace learned of Oliver's dismissal, her indignation only grew. She requested to see Mr. George immediately. Upon entering his office, her presence was imposing, laden with restrained fury. "Mr. George," she began, her voice icy, "I want to understand why a dedicated doctor like Oliver was dismissed for doing what any ethical professional would do, save a life." Mr. George, trying to maintain his composure, replied, "He broke hospital rules. He brought a man in a precarious condition, creating risks for other patients." Grace stepped closer, her eyes blazing with anger. "That man is my father, Mr. George, and if Oliver hadn't acted as he did, he would be dead now. Your rules almost cost an innocent man's life. I can't see anything more antithetical to what medicine stands for than that." Mr. George tried to interject, but Grace didn't give him the chance. "I demand that Oliver be reinstated immediately. The hospital needs more doctors like him, who see beyond prejudice and bureaucracy. If this is not done, rest assured that your entire administration will be thoroughly investigated." The implicit threat in Grace's words made Mr. George realize he was cornered. He knew he couldn't fight a battle against the health ministry's inspector, especially with the truth now exposed. "I will arrange for Oliver to be reinstated immediately," he said, his voice tense but submissive. Grace nodded, satisfied, but still with indignation shining in her eyes. "I hope you have learned something from this, Mr. George. The true mission of a hospital is to save lives, all lives, without discrimination." As she left the office, Grace felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had done justice not only for her father, but also for Oliver, a doctor whose heart was in the right place. At that moment, she knew the hospital was taking its first steps to correct its misguided ways. Oliver was at home when he received the call. It was from the hospital, informing him that he had been reinstated and that his presence was required immediately. The unexpected call caught him by surprise. He had dedicated so much to that place and in return had been unjustly dismissed. However, his passion for medicine and commitment to patients was stronger than any resentment. Upon arriving at the hospital, Oliver was met with curious looks and murmurs. Some colleagues approached to greet him, their expressions a mixture of support and admiration. He walked down the main corridor to Mr. George's office, where Inspector Grace was waiting for him. "Oliver, it's good to see you back," Mr. George said with a forced attempt at cordiality. "You have been reinstated as per Inspector Grace's decision." Grace, beside him, smiled at Oliver, her expression sincere and encouraging. "You did the right thing, Oliver, and that has not gone unnoticed. We need more doctors like you who put patients first." Oliver nodded, still processing the turn of events. "Thank you for the opportunity to return," he said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "My commitment has always been to the health and well-being of the patients," Grace continued. "Your work not only saved my father's life, but also exposed flaws that we need to correct. I hope that with your help, we can transform this hospital into a better place." As he left the office, Oliver felt a mixture of emotions. The initial reluctance gave way to renewed determination. He knew his return would not be easy, but he was ready to face the challenges with the same dedication he had always had. Upon entering the operating room, ready to resume his work, Oliver found a team prepared to follow him. The looks of respect and admiration he received showed that he was not alone. In that moment, he knew he was in the right place, doing what he was born to do, save lives regardless of the obstacles. Months passed since Oliver was reinstated at the hospital, and life gradually returned to its course. Mr. Jonathan, under the attentive care of his daughter Grace and the dedicated medical team, showed clear signs of recovery. The careful treatment and supportive environment contributed to his gradual improvement. One day, while Grace was talking to her father in his hospital room, something unexpected happened. Jonathan's eyes, once lost in a confused void, suddenly focused intensely on Grace's face. "Grace," he murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. "I remember." Grace felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you remember, Dad?" she asked, holding his hand tightly. "Paul," Jonathan replied, closing his eyes as he tried to organize his thoughts. "Paul tried to kill me. He wanted control of the family business." Grace was stunned. Paul, her half-brother, had always been ambitious, but she had never imagined he could go to such extremes. "Dad, are you sure?" she asked, her voice full of incredulity and contained anger. Jonathan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, he attacked me and left me for dead. He wanted to take everything for himself." The revelation hit like a bombshell. Determined to seek justice, Grace began to investigate further. Documents, testimonies, and evidence began to align, confirming the terrible truth. Paul had orchestrated a cruel plan to get rid of his own father and take full control of the family business. The police were called, and Paul was arrested, his carefully constructed image of a successful businessman crumbling before everyone's eyes. During the trial, Grace remained steadfast, supporting her father and ensuring the truth was heard. Jonathan, though shaken by the betrayal, found strength in Grace's constant presence and the hospital staff's support. He knew that a full recovery would be long, but with his daughter by his side and justice served, there was new hope in his heart. The case not only revealed the corruption and cruelty within Grace's own family, but also highlighted the importance of compassion and unwavering duty demonstrated by Oliver and the entire hospital team. The fight for justice had united everyone in a greater cause, transforming pain into strength and bringing to light the true importance of integrity and family love. The news of Paul's arrest spread quickly, leaving everyone stunned. The trial had been a painful process, revealing the depth of betrayal and the unchecked ambition that almost destroyed the family. However, Mr. Jonathan, in an act of surprising compassion, asked Grace to intervene on Paul's behalf. "He is my son, Grace," Jonathan said, his voice soft but firm. "Despite everything he did, he deserves a chance for redemption. I don't want him to spend the rest of his life in prison. Perhaps with parole he can find a better path. I can't put someone of my blood in jail forever." Grace, who wanted her half-brother imprisoned for life, saw the sincerity in her father's eyes. He had suffered so much but still found space for forgiveness. Motivated by the desire to honor Jonathan's wishes and believing in the possibility of change, Grace used her influence to intercede with the judge. The request for parole was granted, but not without stringent conditions. Paul had to fulfill a series of requirements, including community service and therapy sessions, to prove he was willing to change. When he was released, Paul seemed a transformed man, bearing the weight of his actions and the hope for a second chance. Grace met him at the prison's exit, her gaze serious but filled with cautious hope. "Paul," she began, her voice firm, "I will never forgive you, but this is your chance to make things right. Don't waste it." Paul, visibly moved, nodded. "Thank you, Grace. Thank you for giving me this chance. I promise I will change." The following months were a test for everyone. Paul began fulfilling his obligations, working diligently and showing signs of genuine change. Jonathan, though still fragile, found some relief in seeing his son trying to rebuild his life. Grace's intervention and Jonathan's forgiveness brought a new dynamic to the family. Although the wounds were still healing, there was a sense of renewal and hope. Paul's journey to redemption was just beginning. As Paul worked to rebuild his life, the hospital faced another turmoil. Rumors about Mr. George's mismanagement had intensified, leading to a detailed audit. What they discovered was staggering. Mr. George had been embezzling hospital funds for years, enriching himself at the expense of resources meant for patients. The revelation shocked everyone, especially Oliver, who had suffered under Mr. George's hands for doing the right thing. The already fragile trust in the hospital system was completely shattered. The evidence against Mr. George was irrefutable, and he was immediately removed from his position while awaiting trial. During the judicial process, the sordid details of his actions came to light. Mr. George had created a complex scheme to siphon money, inflating supply contracts and diverting funds meant for medical equipment. The hospital, which should have been a sanctuary of healing, had been corrupted by his greed. The testimonies in court were devastating. Hospital staff, doctors and nurses testified against him, recounting how the lack of resources harmed patients. Oliver also testified, his voice clear and determined as he described how Mr. George had tried to prevent Jonathan's treatment and had fired Oliver for following his professional ethics. Mr. George's conviction was swift and definitive. He was found guilty of all charges and received a severe sentence, in addition to being permanently suspended from the medical profession. The news of his downfall reverberated throughout the hospital and the community, bringing relief. With Mr. George out of the way, the hospital began a renewal process. Measures were taken to ensure transparency and ethics in management, and new leaders were chosen with the mission to restore the community's trust. Oliver, now a central figure in the hospital, became a symbol of integrity and dedication. Mr. George's fall was a painful reminder of how corruption can devastate institutions dedicated to well-being. However, it also brought new hope that, with responsibility and compassion, it was possible to rebuild and create an environment where health and humanity were prioritized. Life at the hospital began to find a new balance after Mr. George's fall. Oliver, now a respected and admired figure, continued his work as a surgeon, dedicating himself even more fervently to the patients. His reputation as a compassionate and talented doctor continued to grow, and he became an example of ethics and dedication to everyone around him. But it wasn't just in the professional field that things were changing for Oliver. His relationship with Grace, which had started to develop during the tumultuous events involving her father, blossomed more each day. Grace, with her strength and determination, and Oliver, with his compassion and courage, found in each other an ideal partner. The two shared not only a passion for medicine, but also a profound mutual respect and a silent understanding of the struggles and victories they had experienced. Together, they began to build plans for the future, talking about dreams and hopes that extended beyond the hospital walls. Moreover, the hospital's culture underwent a significant change. Mandatory training on ethics and empathy was introduced for all staff, from the medical team to the administrative staff. The emphasis was on treating all patients with dignity and respect, regardless of their social status or appearance. The management structure was also revised. A new director, known for impeccable integrity and a clear vision of a patient-centered healthcare system, was appointed. Oliver, whose courage and principles had inspired many, was invited to join the hospital's advisory committee, contributing his valuable perspectives and experiences. Grace, in her role at the Ministry of Health, continued to closely monitor the hospital's progress. Her relationship with Oliver and her personal involvement in the hospital's transformation strengthened her commitment to reform. Together, they worked to ensure the hospital became a model of compassion, efficiency, and transparency. The changes quickly showed results. Patients reported significant improvements in the quality of care and the overall hospital environment. The staff, now working in a fairer and more honest environment, were more motivated and satisfied with their roles. The hospital, once tainted by corruption and neglect, now flourished as a symbol of renewal and hope. The journey had been arduous, but the collective determination to transform the institution prevailed. Oliver, Grace, and the entire team were committed to maintaining this new era of integrity and compassion, ensuring the hospital remained a true sanctuary of healing for all. Oliver's tireless dedication to saving lives, even in the face of rigid rules and prejudices, finally began to receive the recognition it deserved. His unwavering commitment to ethics and compassion had been a beacon of hope during the hospital's darkest times, and now, with significant changes in management, his courage was being celebrated in unexpected ways. On a sunny morning, the hospital organized a special ceremony in the main auditorium. Doctors, nurses, patients, and community members gathered to recognize Oliver's extraordinary contributions. Grace, with a proud smile on her face, took the stage to begin the ceremony. "We are here today to honor a doctor whose courage and integrity have inspired us all," she began, her voice clear and full of emotion. "Oliver not only saved my father's life, but also showed us the true meaning of compassion and medical duty." The applause was deafening as Oliver was called to the stage. Visibly moved, he accepted the recognition with humility. "I never imagined my actions would be celebrated in this way," he said, looking at the crowd. "I only believed in doing what was right, treating each patient with the dignity and respect they deserve." During the ceremony, several colleagues and patients took the stage to share their stories of how Oliver had touched their lives. A young nurse spoke about Oliver's inspiring impact on his decision to pursue a medical career. An elderly patient recounted how Oliver's kindness during a difficult time helped her find strength and hope. The ceremony's climax came when Grace announced that, in Oliver's honor, the hospital was establishing a new ward dedicated to humane and compassionate treatment, named after him. The Oliver Ward would be a perpetual symbol of the hospital's commitment to the values he represented. With tears in his eyes, Oliver thanked everyone for their support and recognition. "This is a moment I will never forget," he said. "But the true honor is working with such a dedicated team and knowing we are making a difference together. We will continue to fight for fair and humane care for all." The ceremony not only highlighted Oliver's personal journey, but also reinforced the importance of dedication and integrity in medicine. The public acknowledgement of his work was not just a celebration of his past actions, but a beacon for the hospital's future, guided by principles of compassion, justice, and service to others. Months after the ceremony that honored his dedication, Oliver walked through the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. The Oliver Ward was in full operation, offering a welcoming and compassionate environment for all patients. Oliver and Grace were at the center of this transformation, working tirelessly to ensure that the values of empathy and care prevailed. The relationship between Oliver and Grace had blossomed beautifully. The hospital, which had been the stage for so many difficulties, now witnessed their happiness and personal fulfillment. One evening after a long day of work, Oliver and Grace walked through the park next to the hospital, the same one where Oliver had found Grace's father months before. The moon shone brightly in the sky, creating the perfect setting for an earnest conversation. They stopped at a bench and Grace looked into Oliver's eyes, her face lit by a smile. "Oliver," she began softly, "since you came into my life, everything has changed. I never thought I could find someone who understood my love for medicine and my fight for justice so deeply." Oliver smiled, holding her hand. "Grace, you have brought light into my life in a way I never imagined. With you, I feel like we can face anything." At that moment, Oliver knelt down, taking a small ring from his pocket. "Grace, I don't just want to face the present with you, but also build the future by your side. Will you marry me?" Grace, with tears of joy in her eyes, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Oliver, I will." The couple embraced under the moonlight, sealing a commitment that promised to be as strong as the love that united them. As they planned the wedding, they continued to work side by side at the hospital, turning challenges into opportunities and difficulties into achievements. Their relationship was not just a love story, but also a symbol of overcoming and renewal. Oliver and Grace together showed that true strength came from uniting dedicated hearts and resilient souls, capable of transforming the world around them with love and compassion. The impact of Mr. George's case reverberated throughout the hospital, exposing the corruption and lack of empathy that had permeated the administration. The wedding was a simple event, filled with love and happiness. Colleagues, friends, and family gathered to celebrate the union of two souls dedicated to doing good. The ceremony was held in the hospital garden, symbolizing the place where their lives had intertwined. Oliver's life had been completely transformed. His courage and compassion had not only saved lives, but also rewarded him with true love and recognition. He and Grace continued to work together, inspiring others with their dedication and integrity. Oliver's story was not just about a doctor who defied rules to save a life. It was about the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the importance of fighting for what is right, even when the obstacles seem insurmountable. And so, with hearts full of hope and happiness, Oliver and Grace moved forward, ready to face any challenge the future held.